Now, I gotta tell you, something stinks. I'm not sure what it is, but something stinks. Maybe it's because the world is now $188 trillion in debt, and that number is going to continue to grow each year. But what my nose really tells me is that something is going on with the stock market. In general, I'm going to stick with my intermediate term and long term forecasts. But I think that for day traders and short term folks, the market looks a little frothy. So let's take a look at the charts. And today we're going to look at a couple of charts beginning here with the 20-year monthly chart on the spiders. The SPY and the close on Friday was 308.94. We're going to look at this long-term chart relatively quickly because there's not much that has changed here. The focus I want to do is on the 6-month daily. But looking here at the price chart, everything looks fine. We headed on up to a new record. Moving on down here into the MAC, we can see that things look pretty good here with the basing in the fast line to move up through the slow line. And now you can see that the fast line is starting to accelerate. So in my humble opinion, how long is this going to last? Well, I'm just going to say that based on the 2015-2016 time frame and that move with the fast line going up through here from say 2016 to 2018, I'm going to say that this move here is probably going to last about a year. And oh, by the way, that coincides with the election year. Interesting. And take a look at this little long-term chart moving on up through here. Well, looks pretty consistent with the exception of 2009, so maybe that was the anomaly. Maybe not. Moving on down here into the histogram, things look fine. We popped up above the zero line there. Price rate of change looks fine with the fast line popping back below the slow line, but that's going to reverse. And in here too, the relative strength, we're at a moderate 67.38. We're heading on up, and I think that is going to get up into that overbought territory in that level here, but it's going to take some time. Stochastics looks fine. We're in the overbought territory now, and I think it's going to hold up there for some time. Again, going back to the previous time frame, it stayed up there from 2016 to the beginning of 2018. So I think we probably have maybe about a year, at least by that oscillator, that indication. Volume looks fine. And then the Williams, much like the stochastics. So back on up to the price chart. One last look at that. Now let's go take a look at the 6-month daily. And I've changed my mind and we're looking at a 2-year daily chart on the spiders. I have to go back that far because I want to show you something pretty interesting. Now, what I was referring to in the introduction to the video was that something kind of stinks. And what it is, it's the melt up. You've probably been reading about it in the business news. From this point here on up to the current level, current time frame, I think we're going through a melt up. And how I know that? Well, a couple of signs will show you that. Very, very, very hard to detect, and you might not even be able to see it here because I am on the 2-year. But basically what happens is in a melt up or a meltdown, but we're talking about a melt up, is that the fast line and the slow line here from this crossover more or less move on up in tandem. They're in parallel to one another. There's not much of a change in the difference between the fast line and the slow line on the way up. Most of the time, you'll get a little bit of variation from the first point to the top point, and also somewhere along the lines. You get these variations in here, but you don't in a melt up, and that's because the market is just fixated for some reason, and the buying is consistent day after day after day, and up, 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 up you go, and it's a melt up. The other way, and a better way to show that, is in the histogram. Now, most often, let's go back here to late 2018. Most of the time, you hit these valleys on a downtrend, and then you head on up and you hit a peak. Valley, peak, valley, peak, valley, peak. We hit the valley, but we haven't hit a peak. And what happens is you get this sideways trading in the histogram where the measure does not vary much. Now, my line's not real straight, but you get the idea. There's not much variation here. Definitely not a peak or a valley to a peak. So go back on up here into the price chart. And again, take a quick look at that. Now, do you remember the last time we were talking about a melt up? Well, it was back in early 2018. From that time frame there up to that peak there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the MAC. Again, the crossover here on up. So not much variation between the fast line and the slow line. Again, it probably doesn't really show all that well, but it'll show better once you get to the histogram. Again, you had that bottom there, but it was just really kind of round. It wasn't trading sideways, but it was just kind of round. So this is a very unimpressive move if you're just looking at the histogram. There's no acceleration in the move, and there's no peak in the move. And so that's what happens is in that histogram. You see that? But in the price chart, you get that steady upward steep move in the price chart. Now, at the end, you get to a peak, and then there's a pretty good sell-off. So that's possibly what may happen with this one. This move is not as steep, but it still is very steady, heading straight on up toward the peak there where we are right now. So I'm kind of in the short term expecting a blow off and hopefully, because I'm looking for the contrarian position, hopefully a sell-off. As such, I liquidated my Berkshire Hathaway shares recently, and I'll look to enter back after a blow-off and if we do have a downtrend in the market. Now, I might not be right, and if so, I'm going to miss out on some pretty good gains. But this is something that I've seen before, and I'm just going to go with the probabilities. There is a possibility that we continue on, but I think the probability is that we're going to top out here. I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but sooner than later, we're going to top out, and that's going to blow off, and we're going to have a downtrend. And I'm happy to go back in the market once we have that downtrend. Or if I miss it and I made the wrong call, then I'm just going to have to pick and choose from the best that I can get. And so for today, that's ChewDog Charts. Thank you.